The knight is not trying to kill you. You understand this the moment his sword arm drops. Not from exhaustion, not from mercy. He has already looked at your armor. He has already read the crest on your shield. He has already done the math. You are worth more breathing. You are standing in northern France, somewhere outside Poitiers, and the year is 1356. The ground beneath you is churned to black paste. Men are dying on your left and your right, genuinely dying, screaming, opened up by arrows and bills and the kind of violence that has no elegance in it. But the man in front of you has stopped. He is pointing his sword at your throat, and he is saying one word. A word you will spend the next 4 years of your life paying off. Rendezvous. Surrender. What you are standing inside is not a battle. Not exactly. It is a market, and you have just been priced. You need to understand what you are worth before you can understand what is about to happen to you. Medieval ransom is not improvised. It is not a lucky windfall. It is a system, documented, litigated, inherited, and, in the most successful cases, planned years in advance. Historians Richard Kuiper and Matthew Strickland have both traced the formal architecture of ransom obligation back through the 12th century. But it is the 100 Years' War, grinding across France from 1337 to 1453, that turns the system into something approaching an industry. The rules are precise. A captured knight owes his captor a ransom, commonly set at a sum reflecting his wealth and status, negotiated but anchored in what his estates and family could realistically bear. Not a guess, not a negotiation from zero, a calculation. The captor has the right to hold you, feed you at your own expense, and present your family with a bill. If your family cannot pay, you stay. If your family will not pay, you stay. Men spent years in comfortable captivity, waiting for relatives who had quietly decided the money was better spent elsewhere. The numbers are not symbolic. At the Battle of Poitiers in 1356, the French king, John II himself, is captured by forces under Edward the Black Prince. His ransom is eventually set at 3 million gold écus under the Treaty of Bretigny in 1360. 3 million. France will spend years trying to raise enough coin to bring their king home, levying taxes that break entire regions of the country. John II returns to France in 1360, but when one of his sons escapes from English custody in 1363, a son sent as a hostage guaranteeing continued payments, John II considers himself honor-bound to return. He walks back into English custody of his own accord and dies in London in April 1364, still a prisoner, still technically awaiting the completion of his ransom terms. One man, 3 million gold coins. A country bled dry. But John II is the headline. He is the exception that reveals the rule. What you need to understand is what the system looks like further down. For the knights who are not kings, who are not famous, who are simply well-armored men on the wrong side of a bad afternoon. A knight of middling rank, holding a modest estate, commanding perhaps a dozen men, could expect a ransom of somewhere between £100 and £500. In 1370s England, a skilled craftsman earned roughly £5 a year. Your ransom, if you are a minor knight, represents decades of skilled labor. Your family will sell land, they will sell livestock, they will borrow at punishing rates from Italian banking houses who have been waiting patiently for exactly this moment. The historian Maurice Keene, in his landmark 1965 study, The Laws of War in the Late Middle Ages, documents the elaborate legal framework that governed ransom disputes, because there were disputes, constantly. Who had the right to a prisoner if two knights grabbed him simultaneously? What happened if the prisoner died before the ransom was paid? What if he escaped? There were courts, there were arbitrations, there were cases that ran for decades. This is not chaos. This is commerce. And we have not yet talked about what you, as the prisoner, are expected to do while your family scrambles to raise the money. Stay with me. Here's the thing about medieval battle that nobody tells you. You go in knowing who is worth taking. Before the engagement, knights study each other's heraldry the way a trader studies a price list. The devices on your shield, the colors on your surcoat, the style of your armor, all of it is a publicly readable ledger of your social rank and therefore your financial value. Heralds, the professional officers whose entire job is knowing every coat of arms in Christendom, are present at major engagements specifically to help with identification disputes afterward. You are not anonymous on a medieval battlefield. You are labeled. This changes everything about how you fight. If you are a knight of significant rank, you are simultaneously a combatant and a commodity. The man coming at you has made a decision before his lance drops. Take you or kill you. That decision is financial. If your surcoat announces that your family holds 3 estates in Normandy, the answer is obvious. You are taken. The chronicler Jean Froissart, whose chronicles remain the most detailed narrative account of 14th century warfare, documents engagement after engagement where the pattern is identical. At Poitiers in 1356, French knights are described competing to reach the most valuable prisoners before someone else does. Froissart describes knights physically disputing custody of the same prisoner, multiple men claiming one captive. The prisoner standing there, still in full armor, watching his enemies argue about who owns him. The English longbowmen at Agincourt in 1415 present a specific problem for this system. They are not knights. They do not observe ransom conventions. They are paid soldiers from Wales and the English countryside, and they kill efficiently and without financial calculation. When Henry V, facing a reported threat of French reinforcement midway through the battle, orders the killing of French prisoners already taken, his knights resist, not primarily on moral grounds, but on financial ones. Those prisoners represent real money. Henry overrules them. The order is carried out. The ransom loss is staggering. But here is the expectation reversal you have been waiting for. You might assume that all of this financial logic made medieval battle less lethal, that the profit motive introduced a kind of restraint, a reason not to kill. Historians have examined this argument carefully, and the answer is yes, but only for the right kind of person. If you are a knight, a lord, an esquire of identifiable rank, you are relatively safe once you yield. The conventions protect you. The money protects you. If you are a foot soldier, an archer, a peasant pressed into service, you have no heraldry. You have no estates. You are worth nothing alive, and you are a minor inconvenience, dead. Casualty records from the major engagements of the 100 Years' War consistently show that common soldiers die at far higher rates than the knightly class. The ransom economy does not make war less brutal. It makes war less brutal for a small, wealthy minority and shifts the full violence of it downward onto everyone else. What happens when knights start managing that system, optimizing it, gaming it, treating their own military performance as a revenue stream, is what comes next. Some knights get very good at this. Not good at fighting, good at the financial architecture around fighting. There is a difference, and the most successful operators of the ransom economy understand it completely. The English knight Sir John Fastolf, not Shakespeare's Falstaff, but the real man, whose career Shakespeare later drew upon and distorted, accumulated significant wealth through the systematic capture of French prisoners across decades of the 100 Years' War. Fastolf's financial records survive in part, and they show ransom income as a consistent, managed revenue stream alongside land income. He kept accounts. He tracked outstanding payments. He employed agents to negotiate on his behalf. He was, by any reasonable definition, running a business whose raw material was the capture of human beings. Fastolf is not unusual. He is documented. The historian Anne Curry, whose work on Agincourt and the financial records of English soldiers in France is among the most precise scholarship on this period, has traced ransom income through surviving muster rolls in personal accounts. What emerges is a picture of soldiers, especially experienced veterans on long campaign, who have internalized the financial logic so completely that it shapes their tactical behavior in real time. You learn to read a battlefield for value, not for danger. You move toward the clusters of well-armored men. You avoid the mass infantry engagements where the killing is efficient and indiscriminate. You identify early which engagements are going badly, and in engagements going badly, the ransom conventions tend to collapse. Desperate men stop taking prisoners and start making corpses. You pull back. You survive. You fight another day on a better day when the numbers make sense. This is not cowardice by the standards of the time. It is professionalism. And then there is Bertrand du Guesclin, Constable of France, the most celebrated French commander of his generation. Captured at the Battle of Auray in 1364, du Guesclin does something that stops even his captors. He names his own ransom. Not waits for it to be set, names it himself, at a figure higher than his captor had planned to demand. He then actively solicits contributions toward his own ransom from nobles across France, arguing that his release serves the kingdom. He is ransomed and back in the field within months. Captured again in 1367 at the Battle of Nájera in Spain, the process repeats. Same logic, same confidence, same result. A man who treats his own capture as a financial instrument he controls, rather than a disaster he suffers. What this system produces, at its logical extreme, is a warfare economy where the most experienced participants have essentially separated violence from outcome, where the question is not, will we win, but how much will this engagement cost me, and how much can I make? What happens when that system is finally broken is the last thing you need to hear. The ransom economy requires one thing above all else to function. Both sides have to agree to play. For much of the 100 Years' War, they do. The conventions hold, imperfectly, with violations, with murders and atrocities at the margins. But the core logic persists. Knights take prisoners, ransoms are paid. The war continues. And then comes the Jacquerie. In 1358, the French peasantry rises, not against the English, against their own lords, against the knights who have spent decades fighting each other for profit, while the countryside is stripped bare to pay their ransoms, their campaign costs, their banking debts. The peasants of northern France have watched the ransom economy operate for 20 years. They have paid for it in grain and livestock and labor. They have seen their villages burned, not by the enemy, but by roving bands of unpaid soldiers, the routiers, the free companies, veterans between contracts who sustain themselves by extorting the civilian population with the same methodical efficiency they applied to enemy knights. The jacquerie is crushed within weeks. Several thousand peasants are killed. The chroniclers, all of them literate, all of them noble or clergy, describe the uprising with contempt. Froissart's account is suffused with hostility toward the rebels. What Froissart does not say, what none of the chroniclers say, is that the ransom economy produced the jacquerie as surely as a field produces its harvest. You cannot extract that much wealth from a rural population for that many decades and expect stillness. The other fracture comes from the free companies themselves. The routiers are the system's waste product. Veterans who have learned the financial logic of warfare but hold no land, no title, no access to the ransom networks of the noble class. They cannot collect ransoms from noblemen because no legal framework protects their claims. So they do what the system has taught them. They treat the civilian population as a resource, and they bleed it with the same cold calculation that their betters applied to each other. By the 1360s and 1370s, free companies are operating across France, into Italy and the Iberian Peninsula. Some, like the White Company under John Hawkwood, formalize themselves into mercenary organizations that sell their services to Italian city-states. Hawkwood dies in Florence in 1394, wealthy, respected, and commemorated in a fresco by Paolo Uccello in the Florence Cathedral. The system's most ruthless product, honored by the city he helped protect through the same logic that devastated rural France. The ransom economy did not end medieval warfare. It industrialized it. And like every industry, it produced externalities that the people profiting from it preferred not to examine too closely. The knight lowers his sword. You are still breathing. You will be breathing for a long time, in a comfortable room, in a house that is not yours, eating food your family is paying for, waiting for a letter that tells you whether the people who love you can afford to love you enough. History remembers the 100 Years' War as a conflict over a crown, over a nation, over the question of who had the right to call himself King of France. But for the men in the mud, and especially for the men in the armor above the mud, it was always a question of yield. Not the yield of a battle, the yield of a man. What the ransom economy understood, and what we have spent centuries trying to forget, is that war has never been purely about violence. It has always been about what violence is worth. Change the price, and you change everything. Who fights, who dies, who survives, and who pays for all of it in the end. The price always gets paid. Stories buried in the past,